All right. So as I was saying, we're talking today about main ideas and details. So I'm going to start. This is a little bit of audio. It's from our former program that we used. So we're going to work through a few things here. I'll talk a little bit about, that subject before we'll jump over into essential. All right, so let's take a look here.
The main idea is the most important point of a passage or paragraph. The main idea may come at the...
Sorry, hold on a second. I thought I was talking to Nelda. Nautica, are you not enrolled in Essential either?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I was originally enrolled in Paxton.
Okay.
So.
I'll talk to Rachel about that because I'm assuming that you should both have essential credentials so you can get in there. But I'll talk to her after class and see how that works out. So, but for now, we'll work through this part of the lesson, and then when we get to the essential part, you guys can skip out, and we'll get back to you on that. All right.
Okay.
Beginning, middle, or end of a passage or paragraph. A main idea may be implied or clearly stated. If it is implied, use reasoning and supporting details to determine the main idea. If it is clearly stated, you are likely to find it within the topic sentence, or the first or last sentence of a given paragraph. Supporting details provide additional information or facts about the main idea. Such details include facts, statistics, explanations, graphics, and descriptions. As with other areas of the GED test, questions about the main idea and details of a passage will test your ability to interpret information at various depth of knowledge levels through the use of complex reading and thinking skills.
So everything has a main idea, whether it's a fictional story, it's a book, a nonfiction book, even your television programs, everything, there's an encompassing main idea. I went to see Dr. Strange on Sunday with my family, and there's a lot of times in fiction, you think of it as a plot, but it's the same kind of idea. Dr. Strange is a sorcerer. He was protecting this young woman or teenager who had a very unique superpower, right? That encompasses everything within that story. It's going to be broad, but not so broad as that it, doesn't direct the reader or the viewer towards that main idea, right? The topic. And it happens at every level. So you have an encompassing overall main idea, whether it's an entire book, it's going to be on the same subject. If you're reading a history of the Civil War, they're not all going to jump to a history of the American Revolution, right? And then within those chapters, again, you have an overall main idea for that chapter. That's the way writers are going to organize their writing. And then every paragraph will have a main idea. The way you identify those is through the topic sentence, which it says here. And it's generally, most of the time in nonfiction writing, you're going to see your topic sentence at the beginning of a paragraph, right? And it's going to be really important to identify that. What is this particular paragraph about? The rest of that is going to support that idea. If there's a new idea, that makes it a new paragraph, right? So this is what I'm talking about when it comes to language arts, right? There is things that it's going to be valuable to us when it comes to writing, when it comes to understanding passages or reading comprehension. So that's the way basically your writing, your ideas are going to be organized. One paragraph, one main idea for that paragraph. You're going to find that idea in the topic sentence. Supporting details, just like the idea says, it supports that main idea with relevant details. I know y'all have children. Children are really bad at giving you the main idea and not giving you a bunch of details, right? If you try to get them to, if they watch a movie or something, they're going to give you every detail. And you're like, okay, what's the point here, right? The point is going to be that main idea. So let's take a look here. we have a short passage in the future, starting next week. I'm going to get you guys to read some today and tomorrow, since we're just starting out. I'm going to read our passages for us, and then I might have you guys answer some questions and stuff like that. But just for now, I'll read. Next week, we'll get you guys reading some paragraphs and stuff. But make sure, of course, that you're reading along and you're paying attention. So our passage, a couple things whenever you're presented with information. In this case, we don't actually have anything as far as a citation. A lot of these passages we'll actually know who wrote it, we'll get a date, and a lot of times we'll get a title. Really important when you're trying to find out a main idea. And I've preached this for a year now. Always make sure that you take note of the title. It should 99.99% of the time tell you give you a general idea towards the main idea. So reading here, in 1620, a group of colonists set sail aboard the Mayflower to start the second colony on England's land in the New World. Before going ashore, the colonists wrote and signed the following agreement from the Mayflower Compact of 1620. So that, instead of just having a short title, we actually get like a little introductory paragraph here telling us what this is about, right? We're talking about the Pilgrims who came to the New World on the Mayflower. And this is something that we have to deal with in social studies, particularly sometimes in language arts. We will get old passages that are centuries old. So the language sometimes is kind of crazy. Their syntax and the way they form sentences and the words they use are stuff that we don't use today. It's kind of antiquated. So we also have to kind of, work our way through that. So we whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, having undertaken for the glory of God and advancements of the Christian faith and honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do solemnly and mutually combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation, to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time as shall be thought convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. That is a lot. But they have here underlined, what is the main idea? And here it's buried about halfway through the paragraph. The introduction there is basically telling you who is involved, right? It's basically the Pilgrims who came over on the Mayflower. But the main idea, combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation, blah, 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 to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws. What it's saying here is that this is basically coming together to create a government for, their colony that they're setting up, that they're coming together to have this sort of order under this sort of political system that they're going to create under the Mayflower Compact. So so the second part there, supporting details, saying to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances. So, they're coming here. There's nobody, little history for you too, because since we're talking about the Pilgrims on the Mayflower. First off, there was already people here in North America. We know we have our First Nations people. We have Native Americans that were here for a long time before any Europeans showed up. Secondly, there was already Europeans here. There was already the colony in Jamestown, 1609, I believe. That was the first British colony in North America. And there was already French and Spanish colonies in Florida and in other parts of the South. We talk a lot about the English colonies, the British colonies, because that's what inevitably becomes the United States. So they tend to get more reference than some of the other stuff when it comes to our history. So this is when they land, and they're discussing coming together to govern themselves. Right? They're setting up the colony, and they need to govern themselves. So we'll hop over here. I am going over to our little quiz. We're going to have like 4 questions. It should deal with the same passage that we just read. And I'm going to turn over to you guys here in a minute to answer a few questions. And there's always little tips and things in Paxson that we want to look for. So it says here, one way that a writer may add supporting details for a main idea is to cite examples from history that show an earlier precedent for his or her argument. So this is really big, like when it comes to Supreme Court rulings, they always look for precedent, what has happened before, and that informs their judgments now. We use it in persuasive writing all the time. Well, this happened at this time, and that's largely what we're looking for here. When it comes to social studies, we're going to deal a lot with persuasive text, like I mentioned before. We're going to deal with that in language arts as well. So the main idea oftentimes is some type of claim. I don't believe we should have speed limits, right? Something, whatever it may be, that's an opinion. Now I'm going to have to provide supporting details why I think that would be a good idea. That would be a bad idea, but you see what I'm saying. And we'll get into this in Essential too. You can see the lesson there. We're, really focused on that type of writing. In language arts, we'll deal a little bit with fiction writing too. We'll have some other types of formats to look at, things that we want to center on. In social studies, in the nonfiction part of language arts, we really want to center on looking for the main idea in a passage and then looking for supporting details. And as we go along, we're going to add more information to that. So not just the main idea and the supporting details, but how well and effective do the supporting details support the main idea? And that's going to come down the road a little bit. What evidence do they use? Is it effective? Is it relevant? Is it logical? Is it based in fact? So this is that first step to getting to that point. And I'm sure, some of you guys may have covered that before, or you may be familiar with it. There's going to be times in class where there's things that you're more comfortable with, and there's going to be things from time to time that are new. All right, so we have a question here. Let's see. Which ideal in U.S. history is expressed in the Mayflower Compact? So I'm going to ask Nautica. Could you answer our question here? Question 1.
I have to read the thing again.
You want me to back up here and you can take a look at I'm going to close my window here. You can take a look at it again.
Yeah. Well, I have it pulled up on my computer. I have Paxson stuff.
Okay, good.
Is it the growth of self-government?
It's actually C. And I could see where that would actually, because it's the cooperation between the colonies. So it's expressing that particularly, combine ourselves together into a civil body politic.
Okay.
Again, these early kind of passages that we have to deal with a lot of times can be a little bit confusing. But that's also when we get to social studies, as I mentioned, sometimes we get a little bit of history with it. Sometimes we get a little bit of civics and government, and it all at the end of social studies, because it tends to be the first class that you will finish with, I get a little more involved into giving you guys some supplemental history and some supplemental civics and government to help fill in what tends to be missing in Paxton and Essential. Because the way they want to teach it is through text, through giving you those, critical thinking skills. And sometimes there's little holes missing in the information. So yeah, that first question was C. And our second one here. Oh, okay. So we got fill in the blank. Let's see what it's asking us here. So a total of 56 men from 13 colonies representing New England, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies signed the Declaration of Independence. The signers ranged in age from 26 to 70 and included 2 future presidents, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. So, which 2 colonial regions were equally represented in the signing of the Declaration of Independence, suggesting both their power and importance? Right. So is it New England, the middle colonies, or the southern colonies? So there's 2 here. The way this is kind of weird, right? So you need to know what would be a middle colony, what would be a southern colony, and what would be a northern colony. Let's see here. And they do not have it sort of separated. Your middle, let's see, your northern colonies, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York. And then southern, of course, would be Georgia, South Carolina, Georgia. Your middles would be Maryland and maybe Pennsylvania there. We'll go ahead and answer this one because we need to look at a map here to actually understand what they're going for. But the idea here, right, is that which has the most number of signers, right? So of the 13 colonies representing New England, the middle colonies, the southern colonies, we had a number, right, signed the Declaration of Independence, which is leading us to war with Britain in 1775, which was when the Declaration of Independence was signed, 1776. And we see from each state at the time, colonies, who was signing it. So what they want to know, based on the number of signers, they're implying that because they had more signees, right, they were more influential. So a place like Pennsylvania had 9, Virginia had 7, and that was the most. And then you have a couple with 5. So Massachusetts, New Jersey, Connecticut had 4, and then your lowest number would be Rhode Island, which of course is a little tiny state anyway. So what they're looking for in the answer was middle and southern colonies. The northern ones, particularly like Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Connecticut, you didn't have as many signees, right? 4, 2. New York had 4, but it's a pretty big state. So basically what they're suggesting here is that the middle and southern colonies were more influential along the way because they had more signees of the Declaration of Independence. They had more men working towards their number 1 was C. So moving along here, and a new passage. So make sure paying attention here, reading along with me, and then go ahead and look at the question here. It says the details in the passage support which of the following main ideas. So we're looking for details that support the main idea. War between Britain and its colonies began on April 19th, 1775. But few Americans wanted to break from Britain. Instead, most colonists wanted to gain rights under the British government. As the war continued, however, many Americans began to want economic freedom in addition to personal liberty. On April 12th, 1776, North Carolina's delegates voted for independence, and a month later, Virginia delegates did the same. In June 1776, a committee created a document entitled the Declaration of Independence that explained the need for independence. So that's our introduction here, right? It's telling us, okay, war broke out 1775. Slowly, there was more of a movement to move away from the British Empire. More and more colonists wanted to seek independence. And the Declaration of Independence is a document, all Americans are familiar with, that stated our break from the British Empire, that we were going to become independent. It also goes on to list sort of this, it's an indictment against King George III. So it sort of lists what they believe were the crimes against the colonies committed by King George III. But this first part is what most people are familiar with. And it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation of such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. All right. So yeah, that's sort of the first paragraph there. And as I said, most people are familiar with that. So looking at our question then, let's see, I'm going to go to Jessica. Jessica, could you tell me what is the details in the passage support which of the following main idea?
Would it be A?
A, when war broke out in 1775, the colonists wanted to be independent. It is C. And so it's a little weird, but they are saying here that the colonists cautiously approached independence. So you have to take into account the introduction as well, is what they're talking about here. So the entire passage, even though only half of that is actually from the Declaration of Independence, the supporting details here are that, as colonies began on April 1775, few Americans wanted to break from Britain. Instead, most colonists want to gain rights under the British government. As the war continued, however, many Americans began to want economic freedom in addition to personal liberty. So it took a long time for American colonists to actually decide that maybe this was a good idea. And even during the American Revolution, during the Revolutionary War, there were a lot of loyal British subjects. A lot of them actually moved to Canada because Canada was still, a British colony. But yeah, it was very, very small amount of people that really pushed for independence. Of course, all of our founding fathers eventually, got on board with the idea. And because they were the elite, they, had influence, they had political power, they were able to convince more to actually go to war. But as far as like a lot of just your everyday colonists at the time, they were a little more on the fence about it. We've constructed this narrative in American history where we're all like all gung-ho about, fighting Britain and everything. But the reality was, you still had a lot of people that, weren't sure if that was going to be the right move. You had people that were loyal to King George and Britain. Some of them were harassed. They were kind of bullied by those that were seeking independence, and led to them going to Canada, where they were taken in by British colonists there. So yeah, it was again, the way we paint it in American history, we're all gung ho about it, but the reality was it took a while for that to gather steam and actually become a reality, to fight for our independence. And then that sparked a lot of other independence movements around the world. There's a joke that Britain is responsible for more Independence Days than anybody else, right? Because so much of the world at that time was basically controlled by Britain. They had colonies set up all over the place. So as people got angry at King George, they started seeking independence. All right, so 3 was C. And we have the same passage for our final question here in the Paxson. So let's see. Let's say Kate. I'm going to ask you, what is the main idea in the excerpt? So now just about the Declaration of Independence. What's right there at the top of the screen? What is the main idea in this excerpt from the Declaration of Independence?
I'm sorry, I'm driving, so I have to get to where I'm going.
Okay, we can
Sorry
come
for
back
that.
to Moama. Do you want to try it? Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Mariama.
Mariama. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The main idea. I think it's A.
So it's D. And
Wow.
yeah, so people have the right to end destructive governments and form new ones. So particularly when we get to the last sentence there, so that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation of such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness, right? So that is the main idea there, right? We know Declaration of Independence as a title, right? It's number 1, yeah, it was C. But D for number 4 here, that's the main idea, that people have the right to end destructive governments and form new ones. They can seek independence. So again, thinking about the title, really important, right? Declaration of Independence. We know it's not going to be a recipe for chocolate cake, right? It's going to have to do with declaring your independence from whether it's a separate country or a separate government. That's going to be the focus there. So just expounding on that to complete the main idea. And again, thinking about main ideas, they're broad enough to encompass whatever the entire passage is, but not so specific that it gets into the supporting details, right? And that's a perfect example here. People have the right to end destructive governments and form new ones. Really speaks to that passage. So I know for like Nautica and Nilda, you have another student workbook that you can do with more questions. I just wanted to do this one quiz to sort of introduce. So we're going to move over to Essential. Stay for the lesson, please. I know you guys don't have access to the entire Essential program. We'll find out about that. But for the lesson part, at least stay for that. And then everybody else will do the questions at the end. Like I said, I'll give you guys a few minutes after we get through the questions here, or I'm sorry, the lesson. We'll do the questions at the end. So let me find here on my side. So if you guys want to go ahead and open up Essential. This morning, I'm thinking you guys did you guys work in Essential with Rachel this morning? Did any of you look at the lessons in Essential or anything?
Oh, hey, dude.
I'm going to
Welcome
skip
to the
that
lesson
for
Friday.
a minute.
When I was a teenager, I had a
here.
lot of opinions.
Did y'all look at it at all or anything? Did Rachel use Essential at all this morning?
Yes, the last 15 minutes.
Okay, good. All right. So I'm not sure exactly because I know there's some self-assessments and things that it was supposed to start you with. And did she give you guys some tips on how to get through that so you could start the lessons? Like they're supposed to be, I think when you first open up Essential, it comes up with a self-assessment or like a practice test.
Yeah, she said just go to pre-GED.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, if you guys are all on the same page there, great. Yeah, you're just supposed to go through the self-assessment, start at the beginning, and it doesn't, it's kind of arbitrary, it doesn't really matter, but that way we're all on the same page, we're all in the same starting spot. So if that comes up when you open up Essential this time, you do the same thing. It's a self-evaluation, start pre-GED. We're not doing pre-GED, but that starts us at the beginning. And then we can select and assign you guys stuff that way. I really don't like this guy, this narrator. Fortunately, he's only here every once in a while. Essential does a great job of picking, a lot of different voices to hit a lot of demographics and representation. And this seems to be the white guy that they picked. And I'm thinking, I always question, like, do they think all white guys sound like this? He gets a little annoying, but just try to focus on what he's talking about. The other people that narrate, they're a lot better. They're a little more enjoyable. But so we're going to, sort of review the ideas of main ideas and supporting details. The cool thing about this lesson is that it starts, like I said, talking about how you're going to encounter them on your test, how you'll want to think about them when it comes time to write in language arts, and that overlap with language arts with some of those things. So much more about persuasive texts, which we'll talk about down the road too, like the various forms of, why do people write? What's the purpose? A big one that we encounter in social studies and language arts is persuasive text, meaning that somebody is trying to persuade you to think a certain way or have you, act a certain way or do something. Others are informational, which we'll see, quite often. And then in language arts, when we deal with fiction, more, just sort of entertainment purposes or telling a story. But social studies, more about informative text and more about persuasive text. So I'll let him do his spiel now.
I had a lot of opinions about stuff. Some of them were kind of silly. Whenever I'd say something ridiculous, my dad would hit me with this quote from John F. Kennedy. "We enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought." It sounded like he was saying that I hadn't put a lot of thought into my opinion. And that was usually true. You know how kids are, right? What I didn't realize is that he was talking about people in general. People do a lot of speaking without thinking. And I'm not just talking about kids. It's like the other day, Curtis brought up this new change to the bus schedule. I expected him to be against the change because I'm against the change. But it turned out that he was all for it. I was blown away. Curtis is a smart guy. How can he be for something that I'm against? You see, since I share my car with my brother, I gotta take the bus class on Saturday. But the new schedule shortens the hours of my Saturday route, leaving me no way to get to class. I explained this to Curtis, but he wasn't too impressed. He explained that the other routes have been overloaded ever since the city gave public ride vouchers to kids on their way to and from school. Curtis pointed out that my route doesn't get many customers, and that the city needs to move resources to the busier routes. I had to admit that my route is usually pretty dead. I'm usually the only one on the bus. Curtis's opinion was much better supported than mine. He was thinking of the city, but I was mostly just thinking of myself. That's when I figured, I'd better start giving some thought to how opinions are supported. Here, dude, let me show you what I've learned.
All right, dude. Okay, here we go. Next slide.
Okay, dude. So, let's say you have yourself a social studies text and you're ready to do some serious reading. Now, I know you're here to identify supporting details, but there are a couple of things you got to do before you can move on to that step. First, you need to identify the topic. What's the passage about? You can usually get a pretty good idea of the topic by looking at the title. You can also try skimming the text. Look at the first and last sentences of each paragraph. I also look for repeated words. If a word is repeated.
So this strategy I like most of this strategy. Let me say that. Look at the title. Always look at the title. Know what the topic is. When it comes to, it depends on how much time you have and, what your purpose of reading it is, whether or not you're going to have time to actually skim it, read the first and last sentence of the paragraph and look for repeated words. If you're testing, right, you might, on the GED exam of things where you're actually being timed, you're going to have to do your active reading all at once. That's a word I want you to get familiar with, and I harp on this a lot. Reading is an active activity. It is not passive. We've all done this probably where you've read something and the moment you finish, you're like, I don't remember anything I just read. And that's because we turn our brain off or we turn it down a lot of times when we're reading things, especially if there's like things going on in the background and you're only giving, half your attention to it. So instead of, maybe skimming the text, there's times that you should really look for and emphasize what you're looking for. So obviously you're looking at the title, that gets your brain around the idea of what's going to be in the passage. Rather than skim, you do want to emphasize what the first and last sentence of the paragraphs are. Most likely, not always, as we talked about, your topic sentence will be the first one, or it may be at the bottom, it may be in between, but really thinking about that first sentence will get your mind around the idea that's going to be presented in the paragraph. And you can also look for repeated words. But as far as skimming it goes, you may not have time to come back and read it again. You may only have one opportunity to read it. So make sure that you're focusing on the first and last sentence. Make sure you're focusing on repeated words. Asking yourself, right? It's an active process. What is this author trying to tell me? What is their purpose in writing? And then of course, what's the supporting details once you find that main idea? All right, so let's go on a little bit, see what else he has to say.
It might be important. Once you know what the author is talking about, you need to figure out the statement that the author is making. The statement is what the author is saying about the topic. Usually, you'll find the statement at the beginning of the text, followed by a bunch of support. Occasionally, a passage will begin with support and then make the statement later on, possibly at the very end. Wherever you find it, once you've identified the author's statement, you've also identified the thing that the author needs to support. Well, what do you say? You want to give it a try? Try to identify the statement of a passage.
Yeah, Monica, that's a good strategy as well. It's a good test taking tip. Read the question ahead of time. That way, now you know what you're looking for as well in a passage. So sometimes, when you get to test everything, you may have multiple questions, but at the very least, try to get in the frame of mind of what that first question is going to be. This applies to not just short passages. I'm technically I'm a grad student. I'm working on my dissertation for my doctorate in history. And I spent years on campus, in grad courses, and technically I can say I've read hundreds of books. Reality is I've read hundreds of half of books. In grad school, you just get assigned book after book after book. And you have weekly meetings where you're supposed to know, everything about this book and everything. And even the professors know you are not going to read a 700-page book along with the 500-page book and the 400-page book that was from another class in a week. And the strategy is we would read the introduction, particularly with history. Historians are really good at just stating their argument, or what, they will literally come out and say, in this book, I argue that blah, blah, blah. You read the introduction, you go to the back of the book, you read the conclusion. That gives you the main idea, that gives you a summary of the book. And then once you have those two, things where you know exactly what the topic is, and basically in the conclusion, they lay out what their strategy was and how they presented information. And then you can do sort of the same thing with each chapter, and you fill in what you need. If there's specific questions that you want answered, then you look for them within the pages. So in a 700-page book that I get assigned on biography of Ho Chi Minh or whatever it was, I'd read about 70 or 80 pages of that and could have a hour conversation about the 70 or 80 pages I read of a 700-page book, because most importantly, I knew the main idea. I knew the major supporting details that the author made, which usually came in the conclusion. And then any type of relevant evidence that I wanted to get sort of in the weeds with, I would look in the pages there, right? And then, looking for flaws, logical fallacies and stuff like that, you can do as well. And that is how most grad students get through grad school, because nobody read thousands of pages a week. It was just impossible. All right, we'll keep going here. Oh, that's in that one. Let's see what else he's got.
Which of the following answers best conveys the author's statement?
Okay, so we're going to have a short passage again. I'm going to read it. And we'll have two little short questions here. Once we're finished with that, it opens up to what the actual quiz will be. And I'll turn that over to you guys, give you guys 10, 15 minutes at the end of class to actually take that quiz. I know some of you have been working ahead. Keep doing that if you feel comfortable with it. But at that point, if you finish this quiz already, you can peace out and then meet us for language arts when we get to that. Again, I'll send out a text to let you know exactly what that time was. But we'll take a look at the passage here. Read along with me. All right. And like it says, like Nautica mentioned, which of the following answers best conveys the author's statement? Okay. Do we have a problem in Paxton with answers? That happens from time to time. They'll give you the wrong answer. So I apologize for that. Okay. So looking here, the title, it's kind of broad. President Dwight Eisenhower's farewell address at the end of his presidency. This is section 4 from his speech. So I don't know if it was sometime before the inauguration of JFK, 1961, but this is from his farewell address. So we know sort of the time frame, 1961. I think. And of course, we're dealing with a president here. Background on Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was one of the commanders. He was general during World War II, helped us win World War II, and then becomes president in 1952. Or he's elected in 1952. So read along with me here. A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Now we should already know what we're going to deal with in this speech. Our arms must be mighty ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known by any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. Just to kind of elaborate on that, right? A plowshare being farming equipment. We didn't have any wartime industry, but the people that made peacetime goods could retool to make wartime goods. That's what he's kind of saying there. But now we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security more than the net income of all United States corporations. The conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. And we have a citation at the end there where they got that information. We have the link here. If you actually want to click on it, it'll take you to the documents.gov website. You could read the whole speech. So our question then, which of the following answers best conveys the author's statement? Nilda, would you like to try this one? Nilda might not. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Which of the following answers best conveys the author's statement? A, to achieve peace, one must prepare for war. American weapons must be powerful and ready to be used. B, America spends more on military weapons than the total sum of all American corporations combined. C, because so much is at stake that Americans must be able to mass produce weapons for defense. D, because the military industrial complex is new and powerful, citizens must keep a close eye on it. B,
America spends more on military weapons than the total sum. So that's more of a supporting detail. Okay. What we want as sort of the main idea here is this last one. Because the military industrial complex is new and powerful, citizens must keep a close eye on it.
Great job. Yes, President Eisenhower is concerned that the military-industrial complex, being both powerful and profitable, might undermine American democracy.
So this might come as a shock, considering, the way we hold such reverence for our military today. But there was a time and place where Americans were suspicious of a large standing army. And that comes from our memory of our war with Britain, because we had British troops that were stationed here, and Britain always had this huge, large military. And it wasn't until the end of World War II at the beginning of the Cold War, where we were clashing with the Soviet Union, that we realized that we needed to keep a strong military. And Dwight Eisenhower here is basically, that is what he's concerned about. But he's also noting that it's a necessity, that we need to keep a standing army to dissuade the influence of the Soviet Union. But this is the first time, so from the end of World War II, where we did demilitarize and demobilize after the war for a few years. And then the Korean War happened. And then from that time, the industry began to grow, where we just had a weapons industry. We didn't have, automakers and farm equipment makers continuing to make weapons of war. Now we had an entire industry. So that's where that term came from, this speech, the military industrial complex, which you may have heard, from time to time. We've applied it to other industries, the pharmaceutical industrial complex and things like that. But the idea there is that we don't want them to have too much influence over American democracy, over too much influence just and too much political power. And there's a great debate on whether that has actually happened or not. But that's his fear there, because we're still smack dab in the middle of the Cold War at the end of his presidency, and he sees the rise of these huge corporations that the only thing they basically make are military goods and weapons, and it's giving him some concern. All right, let's keep going here. Maybe. There we go.
Before I dive into specifics, let's talk about what supporting details do just generally. Let's say you're reading a passage about banks. So that's the topic, banks. The statement is, banks provide many financial services. So this is a descriptive passage. The passage is telling you about the stuff that banks do. Since the details are there to support the statement, the details are going to describe the financial services that banks provide. So, banks pay interest on your money. They lend money. They keep your money safe. You see, all of these details support the idea that banks provide many financial services. I guess that a statement is kind of like the roof of a house, and the supporting details are like the walls. The walls hold up the roof just like the supporting details hold up a statement. Of course, not all social studies texts are going to be descriptive. I remember reading this letter to the editor a while back. The city had put in these stoplight cameras to take pictures of cars that run red lights. So you'd run a light and, surprise, later you'd get a ticket in the mail. The author of the letter claimed that stoplight cameras make intersections less safe. So that's the author's statement. To support his statement, the author referred to facts from a number of scientific studies. Look here at the kind of details he used. No improvement in problem intersections. A 20% increase in rear-end accidents. A 5% increase in accidents resulting in an injury. See, this is a persuasive text, supported by facts and evidence. Something that people might find convincing. The kind of details you use depends on the statement you're supporting. A persuasive text needs hard proof. So, when it comes to identifying supportive details, there are a few steps you want to follow. First, identify the kind of statement that the text is making. Is it a persuasive text? Is it comparing and contrasting? Is it giving you instructions? Second, look for the kind of details that will support the author's statement. A persuasive text, for example, is going to need to show some evidence to support the claim. Comparing and contrasting, on the other hand, will need to show examples. Third, judge how well the detail supports the statement. Sometimes authors will use some pretty flimsy support. You want to make sure you spot that. Well, that's pretty much all there is to it. Why don't you give it a try?
We're going to get a lot of practice and get more specific with this. What this idea here. First off, we need to identify the main idea, the main claim or opinion. Sometimes, and also, like he says, identifying what the purpose of the writing is. So even if it's informational text, it might not be persuasive, but does that information that's supporting the main idea actually support the main idea? Is it relevant to that? When it comes to opinions, we're going to spend a lot of time in this, particularly when we get to language arts, when you start working on your extended responses and things like that. How well does that author support their main idea? And we're going to get very specific. What type of evidence do they use? What type of rhetoric do they use? All this type of aspect of understanding that. Right now, what we're doing is just getting an introduction to it. And as we go, this is why this class starts with these types of ideas, is because we are going to continue to build on these skills here. So let's take a look. We have one more little question.
The following details supports the author's statement.
Right. So this is, again, Dwight Eisenhower's military-industrial complex speech. So the question now, and I can reference that if you need to, which of the following details supports the author's statement? And let's go back to Mariama. Could you try this one for us?
B.
The total influence is felt in every city. This one here. That is correct. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and click on it there.
Great job.
Yeah.
This detail explains how significant and powerful the military-industrial complex has become. Taken alongside the idea that the military-industrial complex is new, this detail suggests that the military-industrial complex could be problematic.
Right. So that supporting detail shows how deep the influence goes, right, into every state house, meaning, like every capital in the United States, even spiritually, it's reaching all parts of American society. So that is a supporting detail to show that influence. Okay, so now we get to the quiz, and here's where I want you guys to work independently.
Nice job.
Just a couple things to point out here.
Are you ready to do some practice problems? I bet you'll do great. There are 8 questions to try out. Hey, I'll tell you what. Try the first 3 questions. If you get all 3 right, it'll show that you understand this stuff and you're ready for the next lesson. If you miss some, no problem. You'll just answer a few more questions. If you're like me and get a wrong answer sometimes, try clicking review. That'll help remind you what you learned and get you back on track.
So just a couple things to point out here. First off, you can just skip to the quizzes. If you go to menu, you click on menu and you could start right with the first question. Even if you get the first 3 right, I'm suggesting that you go ahead and do the full quiz for the practice. You don't have to. If you get the first 3 right and you feel comfortable with that, you're fine. Secondly, these scores don't matter, right? If you get every one of them wrong, that's okay. If you get every one of them right, that's great. This is to help see where you are and to help Rachel and I, gauge where you are. So if you need more help down the road, or if we want to, do review on certain topics, we, have something to look at. It's completely, it doesn't affect your, anything in the class. What our, overall objective here is to get you into that GED test and make sure that you're doing well. So just like it says, it's practice questions, no sweat, no stress. So if you guys want to take, I'm going to go ahead and pause our video. I'm just kind of winging it here. How are the rest of you guys doing? Was that enough time to complete the quiz, or do you need more time? Not sure if anybody else is still there. Okay, so just wrapping up here, because we're going to jump over to language arts here in a little bit. One of the important things about these types of lessons, first and foremost, our main objective here for Rachel and I are to help you get your diploma, right? Help you guys get through your GED test. Secondly, we want to help build on your, real world skills, your practical skills, the things that are going to make you, attractive to an employer, your math skills, your communication skills, all of that. Lastly, particularly for me, and if you look at these lessons like what we did today, we have so much information that comes at us at a daily basis, whether it's news or social media or, whatever, diet tips, fitness tips, whatever it might be. And a lot of these skills, these critical thinking skills, will help you weed through that information and find out, what's relevant, what's credible, and what's just BS, right? And that's a life skill that you're going to use, for your entire life. And that's one thing that I also want to promote, not just that's the most important, is getting your guys your diploma. That's what we want to do. But giving you those practical skills and giving you those skills that you're going to be able to use the rest of your life for critical thinking, understanding information when it comes to you, because our world's full of bad information on a daily basis. We see so much. Before I let you guys go, we'll take a little break here in a minute. Any questions about today, Jessica? We'll try to fix on your problems here and get you ready for tomorrow. Not tomorrow, certainly by next week, but you'll certainly be ready to go. But any questions as far as class goes today? I want to take that as a no. All right, I want to shut down social studies. I want to put a text in our group chat. We'll take about a 10-minute break here, and we'll get back into language arts around 1:45, 1:46 or so. Okay. All right. I'll see you all there. Bye-bye.